Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm in an incredibly grouchy mood.
Yeah, that's the impression I've been getting from your emails. What's the problem, bud?
Well, the problem is just the teeth-pulling aspect of these election returns and, your constant primping and concern about your appearance before these shows. It just eats up so much valuable time.
Yeah, I got a haircut yesterday, in fact. Once again, we are doing this as the election returns come in, caught up in a drama that will have been fully resolved by the time anybody actually watches this.
Well, that's right, but there is an interesting dynamic to the drama, which I just realized.
What's that?
Because somebody emailed it to me. Well, the exit polls, this is the Pennsylvania primary we're talking about. The exit polls are all screwed up. The exit polls actually showed Obama winning by 4.
You're kidding.
They were that, and the National Review put them on their website, and they were, the National Review was right, and the exit polls are just all screwed up. They're completely biased. So the coverage has been clawing back from these erroneous exit polls to now the point where Hillary's up by like 6 or 8, and she's probably going to wind up ahead by 10 or 12 before the night is over. But all of the early narrative of is Hillary running out of money? Is this going to be the end for Hillary? Is driven by erroneous exit polls. So the whole dynamic of the night is the networks, being weaned away by reality from these erroneous exit polls that they paid a lot of money for, and blowing the early storyline. The story is that Hillary won pretty big.
Well, no, wait, that'll actually accentuate the storyline because the early chatter from them will have lowered expectations for her. Don't you understand the way these things work, Mickey?
I don't think that's right. I think that the results that only come in until the next morning tend to, what gets said on election night tends to actually have a real impact. It's beyond the expectation setting, and that's in the actual results category. But you raise an interesting epistemological question of when do expectations stop being expectations and start being results?
I think I'm right. So this is Bradley effect in the exit polls? People afraid to admit that they didn't vote for a black?
Well, I think it's Bradley effect on stilts. The Bradley effect is that people are reluctant to admit to anonymous human pollsters when they call up that they're not going to vote for the black guy, or that they're not going to do anything that's PC. They try to put on appearances. There's some talk of a reverse Bradley effect with blacks who are going to vote for Hillary. Blacks who are going to vote for Obama saying they want to vote for Hillary because they don't want to be typed as, race people. I've never believed that. But there are all sorts of possible Bradley effects. But the main one is people who are not going to vote for the black guy, telling pollsters they're going to vote for the black guy, and they do it doubly when they run into an exit pollster who's a young guy wearing a hoodie, outside their polling place, who's obviously, they think is a Barack Obama supporter. They're going to tell him he votes for Barack Obama, or they're going to ignore him. If they're a Hillary voter, they're just going to walk right by him. So
plus it's face to face. Plus it's face to face, whereas polls are by the telephone.
Right. So it's doubly
leaving aside the identity of the person asking you the question. It's more up close and personal.
But if you remember the Kerry thing, I think they determined it was biased because they hired all these college kids, and it actually was the identity of the person.
Okay.
David, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think in the how they covered this for the first hour after 8 p.m. doesn't really especially matter. I mean, I think in the end the deal is, if she wins by double digits, and your prediction was double digits, my prediction was 8%.
It's a fine line.
What's that?
It's a fine line, but I think you're going to be on the wrong side of it, buddy.
I mean, I could be, but if she wins by double digits, basically nobody tomorrow is saying, okay, Hillary, the game's up, get out. If she wins by 7, maybe 8, I think a few people are kind of saying that. But she's definitely not getting out. And I don't know. I don't know. I think there is a big line between 9 and 10, but that's the line we're kind of on, and we'll see.
Well, there is a sort of pro-Democratic bias and pro-Obama bias in the press. The pro-Democratic bias is, oh my God, this internecine conflict is killing us. We better end it soon. The fastest way to end it is for Hillary to cave. And in general, the other people like Keith Olbermann who will say Hillary should drop out. I mean, if it was 20 points, he would say Hillary should drop out. I mean, he's just an Obama person. And I thought the way Chris Matthews phrased his whole coverage was, his whole show was, will Hillary drop out? So I don't know. I'm not sure that the pro-Obama drumbeat won't continue irrespective of the facts. The facts are, Bob, and I'm holding up a prop here, that the cling had a huge effect, despite all the stories about, it didn't matter, we're exaggerating the effect of these remarks in San Francisco. It obviously had a big effect, and the Reverend Wright thing obviously had a big effect, despite all the pro-Obama MSM accounts saying that, Pennsylvania voters didn't care. It turns out they did care.
I think you're kind of wrong about that. But
okay, well, explain. Why am I wrong?
Well, first of all, if you look at the polls, remember when people were saying, well, Bittergate didn't have any effect. The polls in Pennsylvania really haven't changed. I think that was true. If you pay close attention, it seems to me they started changing after the debate. His debate performance is what hurt him, not Bittergate. And I think an explanation for why Bittergate didn't hurt him in the Pennsylvania polls.
Okay.
And it's just that, and it doesn't mean it's not going to hurt him in the general at all. The reason it didn't hurt him is because all the people it offended were already going to vote for Hillary, or Republicans who weren't going to vote in the primary, but whom he might have had a shot at otherwise. So I think he may have permanently offended a number of people, but they were by and large people who had already told. None of them were people who had told pollsters that they were going to vote for Obama. So his numbers didn't change as a result of Bittergate. But with the debate, there was a last-minute change, I think.
Well, a couple of points. First, his failure in the debate was failure to respond adequately to Bittergate and the
right. It was a
charges.
byproduct of Bittergate. I agree, but it wasn't the comments themselves.
So that doesn't really But the second thing is the voters. There's Jerry Skurnick's theory of the two electorates, which is, there's a huge chunk of voters that just don't pay attention until the last minute. So that's when they found out about the bitter comments and the cling comments, as I call them.
Oh, you would have had to be...
That's where they found out about... don't underestimate the extent to which people are inundated by information, and they only acquire information at the last minute when they absolutely have to. And the surveys showed that huge numbers of people made up their minds at the last minute. So
Mickey, 48 hours after Bittergate broke, there were like 3 people in Papua New Guinea who hadn't heard about it. I mean, come on. It was everywhere. It was inescapable.
You're living in an internet cocoon, Bob. That's crazy. Of course, if you read the Huffington Post every day...
No, it wasn't just the internet. It was every cable news channel. It was every network news channel. Where do these people get their glimpse of reality from?
They don't until that's the whole point. They don't listen to cable news. Nobody watches the network news anymore except for
those
old people.
Those people don't vote in primaries.
And they do vote in primaries, and they get their news at the last minute, however they can, often by watching the local news, reading the papers. What happens on the last day, as we learned in New Hampshire, makes a huge difference. And Hillary, again, won the late deciders. So it's hard to argue that those were people that she was going to win anyway when they were late deciders who broke for her.
Well, right now, let me refresh this page, but last time I looked, the numbers looked about the way they looked, 2 days before the primary, but after the debate. What do we got here?
The polls showed Hillary up by like 5-6. She's going to win by 10.
Not after the debate. Look at the difference between after the debate and before.
After the debate in Pennsylvania, the numbers didn't change very much at all. The national polls changed radically against Obama.
No, I beg to differ. I don't mean polls you saw after the debate, but polls that had been wholly taken after the debate. I beg to differ. Anyway...
I dare you to produce such a poll that's not the dreaded PPP poll that bounces around like a ping pong ball.
No, I obviously can't do it now. I'll direct you to the page and walk you through it and make my argument. But so here's the deal, though. So where is she? Let's assume, okay, right now she's up by 8. You think, for some reason, you seem confident that it's going to go up to 10, 11, 12. I don't know why you think that, but let's say for the sake of argument, let's say 10, okay? How much does that really change? Because, here's the deal. I looked at the Slate vote counter before this, and even before this, it was the case that, if she just wins by a blowout every remaining primary, 60-40, every primary, which is not, you would not think is going to happen, he winds up with more pledged delegates. I continue to believe that the superdelegates are not going to take the nomination away from a black man who has the most pledged delegates. So it seems to me she has to change the psychology in the next few weeks, not just of the superdelegates. She has to change the psychology in a massive way of the voters in the coming states. And I don't think winning by 10 here is going to do it. So she's got to either hope that he commits another blunder as big as Bittergate, and that might do it, because that was a really big mistake. That might get her part way there. But barring that, I don't understand. What's the scenario where she wins?
No, you've outlined the scenario. I'm not making an argument that she's going to win. I'm making an argument that the Kling thing was a huge disaster, and this result is a humiliating defeat for Obama. He spent a huge amount. He had to spend a huge amount of money, and if what I'm hypothesizing is right, he's going to lose by 8, 9, 10% of the vote. That's bad. It means he's a weak candidate. Even if he's our nominee, he's a weaker nominee than we thought. That's the point.
Mickey, 3 weeks ago, people were looking to Pennsylvania and saying, well, how can Hillary win? Well, maybe a blowout. She wins by 15 or 20, and the polls at that point showed that was plausible. Then Obama endures a 3-week tsunami of terrible news and winds up losing by appreciably less than that. In that perspective, it just doesn't look so bad.
Well, except that's that's seemingly superficially plausible, Bob. But the problem is that he's always way behind in states where he hasn't campaigned, because people haven't, contrary to your crazy worldview, people haven't paid that much attention, and he gains when he campaigns. So he was 20 points behind. Only people like me speculated that he was going to lose by 20, 25 points. He usually catches up, and he didn't do a very good job at catching up. He's basically where he was 3 weeks ago. So it's just not a great testament to his appeal to the poor white voters who might swing to McCain in the general election. It's just a grim news to Democrats. I
totally agree.
I'm not saying he's McGovern 2, but he's McGovern, half of McGovern. He's McGovern 0.5.
No, I agree that things are very grim for the Democrats. I'm completely depressed on a number of grounds that I could, enumerate if you care. But we agree. First of all, we agree that. I think the betting markets have his chances of winning the nomination now as under 80%, and you agree. It sounds like that's actually a little too low.
No, I agree.
Well, go ahead.
I agree. I want to hear the catalog of why you're depressed, Bob. That'll cheer me up.
Okay, first of all, you agree with that. Now, I'll tell you, so they're underestimating him in the nomination battle, I think. They are overestimating him in the general. If you look at, what's the site that, InTrade, is that the name of it? They had, before the primary, the bettors gave Obama in the general a 47% chance of winning, and that's not assuming he wins the nomination. That's period. Hillary gets like 4% or something. He had 47%. And McCain 39%. If I were a betting person and just in it for the money, I would take those odds and bet on McCain right now, right? That would be a nice little thing to have in your portfolio if you ask me, because I think the Democrats are in serious trouble.
Well, here's my reason for optimism.
Optimism as the Republican you actually are, or as the Democrat you pretend to be?
As the Democrat I pretend to be, Bob.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Obama really will pivot. The grounds for hope is that he has actually used the word pivot. Most of the political pros, unless he's insane, he's going to move toward the center, for the general, and start stealing some of that swing vote ground back from McCain. He's already laid the groundwork for it with his answer on affirmative action, where he sort of implied that you shouldn't get race preferences if you're a well-to-do African American or minority. So there's plenty of ground for him to move to the center. He already has some Republican appeal. So that's the ground for optimism. The ground for pessimism within that optimism is during the debate he gave a horrible answer on Iraq, where he said he's going to withdraw regardless of what the generals say, which I just think, I don't quite see how he squirms out of that. Do you?
Well, I think your grounds for optimism are misguided. You seem to think it's all about the policies, and you want him to become this kind of neoliberal who will meet with your approval and then he can win. I think it has almost nothing to do with the policies. The grounds for pessimism have to do with how successful his opponents have been and labeling him, unpatriotic, radical, in bed with Louis Farrakhan, condescending, elitist. That's what this is about. That's why it doesn't have anything to do with the policies. And the thing about the labeling of him with those labels is that you can't just pivot, okay? And this gets back at the way the spin was done on this Bittergate, and you participated in this right-wing spin in a manner that I will now explain. Again, as I said last week, to me, to sit around and go, is this a real Obama? Is he condescending? Is he elitist? That's kind of silly. I mean, almost all of these politicians, if you get them alone, have something condescending and elitist in their worldview. Okay? That's a silly debate to have. The interesting, and I thought totally legitimate question was, is the political judgment he exhibited in uttering that sentence so bad that we should worry that as a president he might screw up? And I don't think it's easy to answer no to that question. That was colossally bad political judgment he showed. Well, go ahead. I haven't finished my devastating argument, but go ahead.
Well, first they had. It's not like they're independent of each other. If you actually are elitist, that's going to come up and condescending. That's going to come up time and time again during the course of your presidency because you actually believe it and it seeps out whether you like it or not. So that's a really bad sign.
Well, you can keep it from seeping out.
You should care about the substance because it will leach out in the appearances. Second, if he's a free trader and he thinks, people are just clinging to anti-free trade arguments because the economy is in the tank in Pennsylvania, he may be quite unsuccessful in getting approval for free trade arguments, since that may not be why they oppose free trade, and especially immigration. My pet issue. It seems to me they oppose immigration for all sorts of quite reasonable reasons that are not false consciousness because they don't have jobs. There are all sorts of reasons to worry about immigration, like...
Well, you keep getting back to policies as if that's where the damage has been done, and it just hasn't been. He hasn't sustained damage on the domestic policy front lately. That's not why his stock has gone down. It's gone down, and let me finish this argument, okay? There is an illegitimate question raised by Bittergate, which is, does he really think this about Americans? When in fact, again, almost all politicians, they think they're elitist in a million ways and they're condescending. They just have the good judgment not to reveal it. So it's a question. The legitimate question. Let me finish. The legitimate question is about his political judgment. Now, you might ask, why did the right want to focus on the less legitimate question rather than the undeniably legitimate question about his political judgment? And you joined them in focusing on that, and you participated with them, as you always do, in helping them spin the thing. And the answer is, if you conclude that he showed bad political judgment, he can still recover from that between now and November, okay? Because you can say, well, he's learning, it'll get better, and if he doesn't commit a similar blunder, you would say, yeah, he's learned. And whereas, once you have stigmatized him as being elitist, un-American, whatever, that stain lasts. And if he keeps quiet about it from then on, you'll just say, well, yeah, now he's keeping quiet about it. But we saw the real Barack Obama. Well, so that's the reason the right wanted to focus on that less legitimate question raised, and you totally, that was what you totally focused on. So it was a pretty silly question, really.
Can I talk now?
Yeah, I guess.
So your test of whether it's true or not is whether it helps Obama, whether it damages Obama permanently or it doesn't. My test of whether it's true or not is whether it's true or not. And you're saying I'm towing the right-wing line because I focused on the substance as opposed to the legitimate issue, which is the political judgment about appearances. I think the substance is important. I think it was obviously a politically stupid thing to do. There was no discussion there. But I agree with McWhorter on Blogging Heads TV. This was a troubling thing to say. It probably reflected what he really thought. and supporters of him like...
What was troubling? What was troubling?
It's troubling because America's an egalitarian country, and we don't like electing snobs, and we don't like to
what was snobby in a way?
And
how is this snobbishness
a bad thing?
How is this snobbishness different from yours?
Well, I wrote a long meandering post on on whether his snobbishness was different.
What's the answer?
Well, I guess the first in the particular case of his snobbery, which is, do I think that people in Pennsylvania cling to guns and religion because and anti-immigrant sentiment because their economies are in the tank? I just think that's wrong. I think people cling to religion because human beings die, and people confront the issue of death, and they have to come up with an answer to it, and that raises all sorts of questions, and nobody's right or wrong about it. So people are religious because they're religious. I think people are people believe in guns because they like to hunt, and people oppose illegal immigration because illegal immigration is a really bad thing for America. So, so in those specific instances, I disagree with his example of condescension. The question is whether I am also condescending in my view on other issues, like thinking that Arabs are going to come around to a reformist idea of Islam when they face the promise of economic advancement if they do so. And I didn't really have a good answer to that one.
Well, you don't have to go that far afield. Let's come up with a closer parallel. I mean,
okay.
You may be right that he's wrong on the facts, but that wasn't the accusation. The accusation was that he was
my accusation, Bob. Why it was my accusation.
No, but the game you were participating in, the right-wing spin game, was...
What did I say? Why you want to...
Mickey, you just said John McWhorter... You just said you agree with John McWhorter, right?
I agree that it was what he really thinks that it's a
problem. And what did John McWhorter say,
supporters.
Mickey? He said, yes, he was condescending, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about, right? Now here's what I want to know. It isn't... So if that's the question, condescension, it's not about whether he happens to be right in this particular seemingly condescending argument. If this condescension makes him different and bad... Can I finish, Mickey? Can I finish? Then what you have to show is that John McCain doesn't believe anything comparable. John McCain doesn't believe there's any group of Americans whose beliefs can be traced to some form of bitterness. And Mickey Kaus doesn't believe there's any group of Americans whose beliefs can be traced to some form of bitterness. Now, is that the case, that you and John McCain don't believe those kinds of things?
We'll come up with an example. It's not that they're not it's not that people aren't bitter. It's that what people think their views are really epiphenomenal effects of what we really know the cause of their beliefs is, which is the fact that Democrats haven't implemented their policies, and all the beliefs we don't agree with are going to change once the Democrats implement their wonderful policies. Come up with an example of where I agree with McCain on that. I mean, and come up with an example of where McCain thinks that.
Actually, there is an argument that's commonly made that you probably subscribe to, which is, why are... In fact, I think I've heard this from you. You have said this to me, I think, that if you ask, why are, conservatives so fiercely attached to very much these positions, the family values positions, you've said it's because they feel they've lost the culture wars. I assume that would involve some sort of resentment or bitterness. I mean, come on, Mickey, I can't believe you're contesting this. Of course,
well, I don't understand.
You have at some point in your life said they're just bitter. And of course McCain has said that.
But saying you're bitter because you've lost the culture wars isn't condescending, it's saying you're rational. Saying you're bitter because you think you've lost the culture wars, but you're worried because your good union job is left is a little condescending because you're not crediting the person with actually thinking what he thinks for the reasons he thinks them.
Okay, so you think John McCain...
who are bitter about losing the culture wars think they're bitter about losing the culture wars.
You think John McCain does not hold any comparable views about the left? Incomparably kind of condescending...
You're making these lurid conspiratorial charges about how I'm a cog in the Republican attack machine, and you can't come up with any examples. I came up with an example. I did better than you. I came up with the example of my condescending attitude toward radical Islamists and also the the communist Chinese.
But not to any Americans. But not to any Americans, right?
I couldn't think of any. You come up with some, and then maybe I'll agree with you.
Well, what about Muslims in America?
Your cupboard is bare. You're bereft of examples.
What about alienated Muslims in America?
What about them?
You would say that logic does not apply to them at all? The
logic
you
the best I could come up with is you can think people are wrong and that they're on the wrong side of history and that they will change and that they have a sort of false consciousness without somehow disrespecting them. And I haven't quite gotten my mind around that concept because it seems inherently disrespectful. But that was the best I could come up with.
As for you, next week I promise to come up with an example where you will find it hard to deny that you believe something like that, okay? That is my vow to you. But as for McCain,
you're going to walk
do you really think
offline? You're going to do that offline? It's all happening offline today.
Well, it'll be on videotape next week. But do you really think, as far as John McCain goes, that he doesn't look at the people who, in his view, lack, the honor and the integrity and the various things he ascribes to himself? And you think he doesn't look down at those Americans? He's not condescending. Come on. You think he's not an elitist in that sense? You think he doesn't have this elitist view?
You've come up with a good example. I think that, yes, I do think he is condescending toward, for example, people who oppose his immigration plan. I think he thinks they're a bunch of yahoos.
If he's condescending and elitist, and that's in keeping with my claim that basically everyone in politics is, and so why are you spending all this time focusing on Barack Obama as if it would be a real aberration if he were?
I don't think everybody in politics is condescending.
Well, you think Obama's opponent is, but you haven't said anything about that.
I just said I think he is, yes. I don't like that about it.
Well, that's a precedent if you're saying it now.
I'm not going to vote for him, Bob, but the question is, pointing out Obama's condescension, is that somehow you're not allowed to do it because McCain's condescending too?
No, you can do it. I'm just pointing out that if you ask, whatever validity there is that question, it is a more valid question whether it was such a major lapse of political judgment that you should worry about him being president. I actually think that's a valid question, and I was genuinely puzzled. Why hasn't the right focused on the more valid question? And then I realized it just is not as enduringly stigmatizing. So it's a question of spin that's determining where their focus is, and I'm just pointing out that happens to be where your focus was. But there was a good question raised by his blunder.
It's also a question of substance versus whether, when he's tired at the end of a day in an allegedly closed fundraiser, whether he sometimes misspeaks.
Hey, he'll be tired at 3 a.m. too,
That seems to me less interesting.
Anyway. So I will say that I became a little less alarmed by his lapse this morning when Bill Clinton said something that I thought was kind of ill-advised about, they asked him about the race thing, and he kind of said, well, Obama's side started the race thing before South Carolina, and I thought that was a mistake, and he's a master politician, so.
His mastery seems to be greatly overrated. But anyway, it's...
72% reporting, and it's still an 8-point spread, so... Huh. But does that just mean precincts at least partially reporting? Or...
I don't know. I don't know what that means, but it seems pretty high to me.
Well, anyway,
the one thing Obama is clearly bad at is sort of eating crow or eating something else that we can't mention on the show because it's a family show.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He's going to be confronted with these things, and a natural hack politician would sort of say, "Okay, now I have to grovel," say, "Okay, I was wrong. I'm sorry, I offended." Most people usually accept that, and he's sort of too proud to do that.
No, he has a number of flaws as a candidate, I think, and they have become a little more apparent. I thought, the whatever brush the dust off your shoulder thing.
Yeah, do you think that played into stereotypes of black men that are unappealing to white voters?
Well, leave aside the alleged connection to the hip-hop song, okay? I think most people saw the thing where he was saying, after the debate, he was self-conscious about his performance, and he made it sound like there was mudslinging, and he was like, brush the dirt off your shoulder. Now, there was apparently some hip-hop song by an artist that he is known to be familiar with that some people, Matt Iglesias, said that was an allusion to. But I think leaving that aside, it just didn't... it's like he's playing to his base. The people who love that are the people who are going to vote for him for sure. And the people to whom it looks like a little weirdly cocky are people who might or might not vote for him. And I think it's a mistake. And I think he's done that more than once.
I think that's a good point. But I think the larger issue is that you don't know the name of the artist.
Something with J in it?
Jay-Z.
Thank you.
That's pathetic, Bob. But anyway, even I know that. But no, I agree with you on that.
So, he's got issues, and he can't laugh at himself enough. I mean,
but that's a permanent charge against him, Bob. You're just echoing the Republican Party line here and coming up with some permanent defect in the guy.
No, but these are things that I don't think.
Why is what you're saying is coinciding with what the Republicans are saying? You might as well be.
Actually, they're not saying that, but these are things that I don't think are true of every politician. These are actually distinctive traits, and they're not. And also, they're not. They're not the kinds of things that would, by and large, convince somebody to not. It's not like saying a guy's unpatriotic or or anti-Semitic or any of the other things that they've tried to tar him with.
But that is one problem with your theory that that these are things he can't pivot to, because he is trapped a little in his ability to respond to things by not having to not offend the Democratic primary base. If he embraced the flag, he might turn off some people.
I don't think so.
If he went to the center on affirmative action and a bunch of things, he might offend some people on the on the guns thing. If he said I love religion and guns and blah blah blah. I mean they're just I don't know.
He does say I love religion. What are you talking about?
But I think there are some ways in which fully answering those is easier in a general election than in a primary. I can't quite articulate it.
If he embraced the flag more and started wearing that pin more, the only person he'd alienate is Bill Ayers, and that would be okay, I think. Another totally illegitimate charge, I think. I mean, by the way, you know what's interesting? All this stuff about, you associate with the Reverend Wright who has sinned, and with Bill Ayers who has sinned. Maybe he shouldn't actually say this, but it is a fact that this is actually exactly what you would expect from someone who professes the foreign policy ideals and tactics he professes. He has said he talks to enemies. He doesn't cut off communication with people who do things he disapproves of. He will talk to whichever Castro is running Cuba.
I think
and that's the guy he is.
I think the key point is the point Michael Barone made, which is he went to this church. The very first sermon he heard, Reverend Wright talks about white man's greed makes a world in need, okay? That's just sort of the quotidian sort of rhetoric of the church. His point is he's not a man who has transcended race in his life. He's a man who wandered in the wilderness and then created a authentic racial identity as a black man. So he's done the opposite of transcending race. He's found a non-transcendent racial identity. His whole book is about not transcending race. It's about making himself a race person. So he's not what a lot of people see in him, which is he's the guy who's going to make race irrelevant. He's not that. He is a guy who is very much bound and sort of forcefully by self-imposition has bound himself to one particular race, and that's not what people thought they were getting.
Actually, I think he can play it. He can play it both ways. I mean, he may have kind of a split personality in that sense, but I don't think he's.
And one thing, a split personality at this point.
And one thing I've said before is, I wonder how much racial healing he could do if he were not considered kind of authentically black by people in the black community. But anyway,
that's the counter argument. But it seems to me, he's not going to alienate blacks if he doesn't have an authentic black. Who are they going to vote for? I mean, they're going to vote for McCain because they might say,
black, I'm not talking about voting. Black. I'm talking about what kind of leader he could be after he wins. But so it's looking. I don't know. It's getting okay. Hillary's up by like 8.5. Kind of. It's looking like. I don't know. It's looking unlikely that she's going to get to 10. In which case, I don't think the betting market's really move in her direction significantly, and I don't think, in real terms, her situation has improved much. And don't you agree? I mean, certainly
said the over/under was 8, so she has 8.5.
Yeah, okay, but so we got Indiana and North Carolina coming up. Certainly, if he pulls out a win in Indiana and presumably wins North Carolina, she's dead, don't you think?
I would hope so, but I'm, the grim reality of it is, for the Democrats, is that their convention is not at the beginning of the summer, but at the end of the summer. It's practically at Labor Day. So, if she doesn't give up, they spend the whole summer doing this.
I think if he wins Indiana and North Carolina on the same day, the calls for her to get out of the race are going to be deafening. I really do. Now he may not, but I think even if he wins North Carolina by like more than she wins Indiana, the calls are still going to be pretty loud because people are just going to look at the numbers and go, the only hope for you is if he just totally self-destructs.
Yeah, I think that's right. I agree with you.
As for the reasons for my depression, which I never quite enumerated, as a Democrat, I think he is, the stigmatizing I referred to has been pretty successful. He's now thought of by a number of people who might have otherwise voted for him as unpatriotic, radical, elitist, condescending, and there may be doubts about his political judgment too, based on the remarks that led to Bittergate. So if he wins, I think he's got real work to do. And then if she wins, the only way she does win, I think, is by rendering the party incapable of winning a general election. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it creates real problems. But the saving grace is the filer faster principle that even if the convention is in late August, there's a lot more time between August and November now than there used to be. And there's a lot of time to repair fences and change the dynamic and bring people together. I'm afraid I remember 1968 when it seemed that people would never come back to Humphrey. Humphrey didn't win, but people like me who thought Humphrey was the devil, came around the day before Election Day. So it does tend to happen. I do think there's plenty of time for that.
Yeah, but I think
the patriotism thing is easy to dispel. He's really a complete incompetent if you can't dispel that. The Iraq, the I'm going to pull out of Iraq no matter what is hard to dispel.
Well, that's the kind of thing he could actually pivot on, though. The trouble is these other things are harder to pivot on.
Well, what did he say?
I'm not saying he will.
My answer in the debate was false because I was running in the primary. I've changed my mind now that it's the general. I guess that's been said before, but it seems a little fishy.
You said he's going to pivot on things. That's what you say when you pivot, I guess. He's got to say something.
Well, affirmative action, he's left the door open, and he can just walk through the door he's left open.
Okay.
Iraq, he's closed the door. He has to knock down the door to get to the center.
Yeah, I think that the Iraq thing is unfortunate. Out within a year is unfortunate. The other thing, though, actually the main reason I'm depressed is because I now have almost no hope that anyone who could conceivably win this election is going to have a productive foreign policy, because he is so boxed in now. He will be so defensive on the foreign policy front because of the kind of traps he's fallen into, that he's not going to... I once had hopes that he might do something bold in the Middle East that, led to some sort of resolution of the Israel-Palestine problem. I no longer think he feels he has the political capital to do that. Hillary, I don't know that I ever thought she was very likely to do it. And just generally in foreign policy, the guy they're talking about as their Secretary of State, Dick Holbrooke, is a guy who didn't even want to take the Iraq issue to the United Nations in the first place. He just wanted to go ahead and invade.
I thought
that's her foreign policy, apparently, if it's true.
I thought by electing Obama, we calmed down the world and have a huge wave of positive second thoughts about America.
I think the world's eager to give us
that still happens.
I think the world's eager to give us a second chance. Many people in the world.
I'm not sure he's. I think his main problem with achieving some sort of solution in the Middle East is he's too big a wuss. You have to. The amount of grief an American president has to endure to put meaningful pressure on Israel is pretty strong. The most effective at that was George Bush Sr., I believe, who's still loathed by large segments of the Washington Jewish lobby. So
now there is this new left-wing Jewish lobby. You haven't heard about this?
I read about it. Go ahead, tell us about it.
Well, do we agree that its name is terrible?
It had some terrible name like Juiced or something, right?
No, it's not that bad. It's J Street, just the letter J. Yeah. But the reason it's bad is because people remember it the way you remembered it. What did you think it was?
I thought it was juiced. The juice. You got the
It's
juice.
not quite
That's
that
actually,
bad.
that's actually
no,
a pretty
it
good
shouldn't.
name. That's
What?
a pretty good name.
J Street?
No, juice.
Spelled
Yeah, juice.
how?
Well, spelled like orange juice, but when you have swag, when you have pull with legislators, you have juice.
Oh, so
Juice is also a word for money in politics, so it plays into the very worst stereotypes of Jewish
and that's the
influence.
only name I've heard of that's worse than the name they actually came up with.
And why is it terrible?
I mean, the name, they should play exactly AIPAC's game and have a name like, Committee for the Security of Israel or something. I mean, they should play exactly AIPAC's game.
Yeah, they're being
J
too witty.
Street, what is that?
They're being too witty. Yeah.
That's terrible. But
Beatles
anyway,
is-
there is this left-wing Jewish lobby now.
Beatles is a bad name, too.
What?
Beatles is a stupid name, too. You can transcend stupid names. Some even say that Blogging Heads is not such a brilliant name. But I know
No.
I'm hitting on a sore spot there. But the point is that there are all these polls that show the majority of actual Jewish voters disagree with AIPAC. So presumably they.
Well, that's what this new lobby is supposed to be a vehicle for. But anyway,
But I agree. It sounds sort of amateurish.
But he is, yeah, it does. He is so, and it sounds like it wants to be young and hip, and it's like, sorry, no time for that. But he's so boxed in on that issue now and so defensive. I think you're right. There are also questions as to how bold he would be. Even though I think his foreign policy instincts are right, I wonder if he would, do the pedagogical stuff you need to do. I mean, actually instruct the nation about why certain things are important. And he's capable, as an orator, of doing it. But he hasn't taken any of those kinds of chances in talking about foreign policy. Well, not many so far. So anyway, I'm depressed, and I think McCain is just a total disaster. I mean,
that's an interesting point. One measure of whether you're a good politician is whether you can take an audience that's leaning against you and convince them to change their minds and be for you, or at least a majority of them. And, Tony Blair arguably did that in the Labour Party in Britain. Bill Clinton arguably did that with welfare. Obama, for all his rhetorical skill, hasn't really shown a whole lot of ability to actually teach and instruct. He inspires, but he hasn't actually changed a whole lot of minds. And that is something to worry about, especially since, you get all the pain of being lectured to without the actual results.
He inspires via very vague themes and does not take on stiff pedagogical challenges.
And he's perfectly capable of it. I mean, all you have to do is say, no, the problem with this is this, and if we have this tax, then we can't get the money elsewhere. Clinton was quite good at that. He was a relatively honest politician who sometimes explained to you the dilemma so you agreed with his solution. I just haven't seen that yet from Obama. It's a primary. It's hard to do in a primary.
Yeah.
Give him some time.
So, and I do think that rarely, if ever, has America more needed a president who will be a teacher and explain why we need to do some counterintuitive things, especially on the foreign policy front, or some things that aren't viscerally gratifying.
What about the just 4 years argument for McCain, which is he's really old, he's only going to be in there 4 years, he finishes off the Iraq War, doesn't do any more damage, doesn't start any more wars. We don't get health insurance, but we also don't get his immigration plan, and he's out of there in 4 years, and then we can elect a Democrat.
I am on record as thinking 4 years of McCain is better than 8, but 4 years of McCain is worse than 4 years of Clinton or Obama. Okay. I just think he's, he has this bizarre glorification of war that is reminiscent of like Teddy Roosevelt. He has a kind of, a temper that is, reaches pretty pathological levels. And worst of all, he just reaches policy conclusions through, gut reaction. And on the foreign policy front especially, that just scares me to death. I mean, given that his values already predispose him toward military conflict.
I thought
there's a reason the neocons love him. They know exactly what they're getting.
Well, but the conservatives hate him because he also reaches his conclusions on the basis of what will appeal to his reporter friends. On immigration, campaign finance reform, all sorts of other issues. He does he seems to go for the applause from the press. So,
well, you care about those issues more than I do, and I care about foreign policy more. And there, he seems totally on the neocons' wavelength, and they know it, and they love him.
What's your answer to the Charles Krauthammer argument that there's an advantage to seeming to be an irrationally angry madman in the White House? People treat you very, very gingerly, and they're not about to provoke McCain if they think he's a hothead who might.
Well, I mean, in a case of nuclear kind of standoff, that can be useful. And in fact, I think Nixon intentionally did Charles bring this up? Did Nixon intentionally fostered that idea? I think in the context of Vietnam, or was it Eisenhower in Korea? Somebody intentionally fostered the idea.
I think it was Nixon in Vietnam, and Charles did bring that up.
Yeah, and that he might use a nuke. Well, there it makes sense. But look at the kind of enemy we face now. Now we face an enemy that actually wants the president to lose his cool and invade some country. Okay, that's what they want. So, no, it doesn't make sense now. I mean, I'm talking about, like, Al-Qaeda. I mean, they're delighted that we invaded Iraq, and so, you know, and in fact, there's some speculation that, for that reason, they know that McCain would be better. There are serious thinkers in the Democratic Party who worry that because Al-Qaeda knows McCain would be better for them by virtue of his recklessness than a Democratic president, that they will, and they know that if they stage some big terrorist thing 3 weeks before the election, a Republican will win, that they might actually do that. How's that for a conspiracy theory?
I don't think it'll work that time, but I liked your answer to Krauthammer.
Oh, thank you.
You've restored my faith, and I hope that cheers you up, that I validate your argument.
It makes me feel bad that I yelled at you earlier.
Well, you should. You were sort of mean, although people who listen on the podcast seem to feel that I was mean. But that's because they can't see my smiling face on the podcast.
I think that's it. You were not made for radio, man.
If you take in the whole gestalt, it's clear that you are the mean one.
So finally,
the
Al Gore question. He's now up at about 4% on the betting markets.
Please, don't bring that up. He polls terribly. There's no reason to think he'll do any better than Hillary or Obama.
Actually, well, you could make the case that actually at this point, Obama may be so damaged that Gore would do better than Obama. You could also make the case that, I mean, the only way he would, I think, wind up there is if the alternative were more or less the destruction of the party. In other words, it would have to be like Obama screws up again big time, something horrible happens, so the superdelegates are like, no, this guy can't win, and yet we can't give it to Hillary.
Right.
That's the way you wind up with Gore, I think.
It's true, but he took a hit, too. It was revealed he used computer animation for the big iceberg scene in Inconvenient Truth.
I don't think that's quite the same as like going to Reverend Wright's church and being known as unpatriotic and condescending. But in that case, I would recommend what you recommended for McCain is a one-term pledge. For him to just say, okay, I'm here to solve this problem, then I get out of the way. I guess you make Obama the vice president, and the idea is that he gets more seasoning, and you give Hillary HHS.
He's going to solve global warming? God, don't give Hillary HHS. He's going to solve global warming in 4 years? Is that the problem he's going to solve?
Well, there's an argument that certain kinds of initiatives, like the Middle East, actually, are harder to take on if you're angling for re-election, so that might actually liberate him in that area.
You think Al Gore is going to be tougher on Israel and the Middle East than Barack Obama?
Yeah, than Barack Obama, than the Barack Obama who exists today. Yeah, given the political pressures on Obama. Yeah.
Which one is Marty Peretz advising again?
Well, oddly, oddly, Marty, favors both. I think he supports.
That's true. I think
he supports Obama, and for historical reasons, he supports Gore. But I think Gore's foreign policy has changed since Marty supported him the first time, for whatever reason.
Anyway, I think you're like reading Gore as a blank slate the way people read Obama as a blank slate.
Yeah, I think it's actually hard to say where he is on foreign policy broadly.
What about my candidate? Aren't you impressed with Rendell every time you see him on TV? Smart guy, lost a lot of weight, honest.
That's your candidate? Have you seen the video that's going around today of him and Louis Farrakhan?
Oh, I know. He's capable of completely sucking up shamelessly to Louis Farrakhan when he doesn't mean a word of it.
Well, this was
a real politician, man.
This was a much closer connection than anything between Obama and Farrakhan. This was him giving a talk with Farrakhan sitting there glowing as he praised the Nation of Islam and I think Farrakhan himself. This was.
I think that's right. But
are you serious about him as a candidate for president at some point?
I was serious. Yes, I'm a sucker for candor, and he's a very candid guy who's governor of a swing state. I think he's doing a pretty good job.
And he's got a lot to be candid about with that video floating around.
I hadn't seen that video, but some have argued that it shows that he's also capable of being an effectively shameless panderer.
You'll be happy to hear.
The problem with Obama isn't Farrakhan. The problem is Wright. It's completely implausible that Obama is too close to Farrakhan. It's not implausible that Obama is too close to a weirdly a black church that excessively breeds the idea of victimization. I mean, that's.
Well, no, but it isn't just that. I mean, Farrakhan is related to one of the vibes associated with Reverend Wright, which is anti. I don't know, Zionism, Semitism, whatever you want to say, but that's the, Hillary brought up in the debate that, that there was some connection between Obama and Hamas. I guess the connection is that Obama's pastor once quoted Hamas in the church bulletin, basically.
He once reprinted an article by somebody at Hamas, Bob.
Okay, but there's a reason she brought that up, Mickey. And it's not because she wanted to accuse him of endorsing black victim mentality.
Right, but it wasn't. But it was the terror thing. It wasn't the Israel thing. I mean,
totally was the Israel thing. She was totally after the. She was after the Jewish vote, Mickey. She's totally after the Jewish vote when she brings that stuff up.
I guess there is a big Jewish vote in Philadelphia, so maybe you're right.
Yeah, I think that's what she's thinking. Now, you'll be happy to hear, Mickey, that she's now up by 10%.
I do feel vindicated.
82% reporting. Well, maybe we should just about close on that note of apparent vindication for you.
I'd like that. That'd be good.
I think, 10%, it would pretty much totally stifle the, okay, get out, Hillary, cries tomorrow, but I don't think it's a game changer,
I agree, but it's not a game changer, but it's a failure for Obama. Even if he's going to win, it's a bad plot. I think her on the betting line on her will go up very slightly. It already went up during the day for reasons I don't understand significantly, but from now on out, I think it goes up very slightly. You're fixated on the horse race, Bob. You're just like the mainstream media.
Well, it's just it just permits a certain form of prediction. You can predict. In other words, I mean, people vaguely say, well, I say that 10 points is a victory for Hillary, and I say that 8 points is, and I say that 12. What does that even mean? The only way to translate that into like a scientific prediction is to say, I believe X will happen if she wins by this. And the clearest place to do that is in the betting markets. Okay? That's why I like that.
You're even worse than the mainstream media because you care about the betting markets. Who cares about that?
I'm a scientist. I care about verifiable predictions.
Whatever, it's complicated by the fact that, you say if she has such and such, she has momentum, but she's always had reverse momentum in this race. So the fact that she beats expectations and has momentum might mean that she loses the next one because people tend to react negatively to her when she's in front. So none of this is scientific, and you're a fool to try to impose any sort of science on it. It just shows that all the MSM cheerleading about how Obama's going to win over the white working class and that Wright was not a big problem, that the Kling thing was not a big problem, was a crock. That's the important thing. The press criticism angle, Bob. That's what's important.
Well, I stand corrected then, Mickey. Thank you.
No, I was being self-mocking.
I'm just trying to end this dialogue. I capitulate.
Let's do that.
I totally capitulate.
Let's do that.
You've been right about everything tonight. I've been wrong, and I apologize. And worse than that, I've been wrong and angry, Mickey. I'm sorry about that.
Mickey Kaus is the finest American I've ever known.
Mickey Kaus is the finest American I've ever known. Is that from the Manchurian Candidate?
Yes, we have our soundbite.
We do. quickly, we promised Wonderment we would answer his question about human rights and why I'm not such a human rights hawk in foreign policy. Promise to get to that next week. And I think that's about it, except for closing on a note of vindication for you, because you may have nailed this double figures thing. But finally, I think I deserve credit because you made your 10% prediction first, then I made my 8%. I did not adopt the cynical, the price is right strategy of just barely undercutting you at 9 so that I would, right?
You're a big, big man.
Thank you. And on that note, we really should bring this to a close.
Okay.
See you next week. See you.
Okay.
Okay.